Hello, everybody. This is Debbie Spoons, host of CaveNet. This is NSS webinar program. Tonight we have a wonderful program called Wonder Cave by Kelly Smallwood. Kelly is going to give us a lot of great information, but let me talk to you just a second about Kelly, and then I'm going to turn it right over to her. Kelly is an accomplished cave photographer and also a writer. She's earned both the Merit and Honorable Mention Awards of the NSS, our parent organization, in salons for her photography and newsletter covers, as well as having some of her images featured on the cover of the NSS News. All of us have seen those. Kelly's a life member of the NSS and has dedicated many years to the caving community, very selfless service, for which she received the Fellow Award in 2014. She's also very involved with conservation and survey work with her husband, Jason Hardy. Now, Kelly's participated in more than 75 mapping projects. She's been really busy, including the mapping of a 450-foot deep multi-drop and pull-down caves such as Solution Rift in Tennessee and Doodlebug Hole in Alabama, and surveying caves for the Jack Daniel Distillery. Now, in 2018, she was also the first recipient of the Avis Moni Hospitality Award for the Southeastern Regional Association of the NSS. And Kelly and her husband live in the heart of Tag, which is Cave or Heaven, in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. Now, just a reminder, all webinars are recorded and stored on the NSS website by our awesome webmaster, Alex Sproul, for future viewing and downloading. They're there for you to use for any kind of educational purposes, grottos, regionals, or whatever you need them for that would further the NSS. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and turn everything over to Kelly and let her give you her awesome presentation. If you have any technical issues or anything that needs to be addressed, use your toolbar and go to webinar toolbar and text me, and then I'll take care of it. All right, Kelly, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Debbie, and thank you all for joining us tonight as we talk about the history of Wonder Cave, which is located in Grundy County, Tennessee. All right, so Wonder Cave is actually located on the Cumberland Plateau in the Pelham Valley, and it's about 2 miles from Monteagle. If we zoom in a little closer, we notice that it's actually at the base of Cedar Ridge, which is on the north side of Lane Cove in Grundy County, Tennessee. This cove was formerly Hollingsworth Cove. However, the name changed around 1860 because of the proliferation of the Lane families who lived there. And it's also formed in the St. Genevieve and the St. Louis limestones. Now, we know that Native Americans, the Cherokee Indians, used this area because of the large quantity of artifacts that were found here. It was located along the old Nickajack Trail, which went from Manchester, Tennessee, near Stone Fort, over the plateau and down through Bridgeport, Alabama. It is believed that Native Americans did not enter the cave because the original entrance was much smaller than it is today, and no artifacts or markings have ever been found inside. However, items found near the cave were numerous arrowheads, pipes, and pottery, and at one point, many of these items were actually even on display in the cave gift shop. Sadly, these items were either removed by the family or lost during the change of ownership in the late 1980s. Also, prior to being known as Wonder Cave, this area was once referred to as the Big Spring. In the early 1800s, this area was also settled by a Frenchman named Deloche. He built a 2-story cabin that stood near the spring entrance of the cave for over 100 years. We're going to talk a little bit about the proprietor of Wonder Cave, who is Robert Marion Payne. He was born in Sweetens Cove. He was one of 8 children. He grew up as a farmer and was employed as a scout by the Confederate Army when he was 15 during the Civil War to spy on Union soldiers. He later became interested in school, and in 1869 he attended Burritt College Then he went on to Lookout Mountain Educational School, and he finally graduated from the Sewanee University in 1873. After college, he went on to become the superintendent of Marion County, Tennessee schools, and he did that for a few years, and then he decided he wanted to start getting into business. So in 1879, he began leasing and operating the Battle Creek Coal Company, and he soon became the largest individual taxpayer in the city of South Pittsburgh. A few years later, after he got tired of getting his hands dirty in the coal business, he decided to move to Monteagle, Tennessee, and become the proprietor of what was known as the Monteagle Hotel. A few years later, he actually ended up running for Senate, but he never won a seat in the Tennessee. So we're going to talk a little bit about the hotel that actually brought Robert Marion Payne to Monteagle and then later to Wonder Cave. So the hotel was originally built in 1881 as the Monteagle Springs Hotel, and it was owned by the Monteagle Assembly. It was then sold to a Mr. Corzelius, and he renamed it the Hotel de Corzelius. When Robert purchased the hotel, he then changed it to the Monteagle Hotel. 1 year after he passed away in 1917, his daughter actually sold the hotel but kept the cave, and we'll talk about that a little later, why they did that. The hotel did actually burn down in 1929. They rebuilt it, and it burned down again in 1950. It was never rebuilt after that. However, there used to be this really large eagle statue that sat in front of the hotel. It had a 6-foot wide wingspan. And after it burned down, some Tennessee Tech students actually drove down here to Monteagle, and they actually stole that eagle. They painted it gold, and they took it back up to Tennessee Tech for a rally for a football game. For years, people in Monteagle worked really hard to try to get that eagle back. The Tennessee Tech did make a donation of $500 at that time, but then in recent years, they actually were able to get a replica of the eagle that's now back in a park in Monteagle. And if you visit the NSS convention this year in Tennessee, you can see that original statue is still on one of the buildings there at Tennessee Tech. So now let's talk about Wonder Cave. It was discovered in 1897 by 3 Vanderbilt students, Robert A. Nelson, Melville Anderson, and Will Fitzgerald. Soon after they discovered it, it was purchased by Robert Marion Payne from Francis Ryder for $10, a goat, and a cow. After the boys had discovered the cave, they had ran around on the mountain and told everybody of the beautiful findings that they found in the cave, and that's what piqued Robert's interest, was to have this cave to go with his hotel. So he blasted a larger entrance for boat tours, and he constructed a wall in front of the cave. He spent several thousands of dollars making developments and improvements both inside and out, and hundreds more in advertising its beauties and grandeur. So he has this hotel on top of the mountain, and now he has a cave down in the valley to attract more guests to his property. So in August of 1900, there was an article for the Chattanooga Times announcing that there was this new cave in Monteagle. And he stated if he were to name it, it would be called Paramount, for it had more splendid beauty than any other on the continent. So a few months later in November, Robert announced that the cave should be suitably named, and he offered a prize of $10 for the best name that would be handed in before February of 1901. A few months later, on February 26, 1901, it was announced in the Nashville American newspaper that a long list of names were submitted and that the decision of the judges united 2 names, and it was to be called the Monteagle Wonder Cave. So during this time at the turn of the century, it started popping up in newspapers all over the place about this new cave and advertising trying to get people there. A few years later, Robert began exploring the idea to help travelers ascend the mountain more safely because they were using horse and buggy and obviously walking up and down the mountain. So he decided to build a turnpike that would go from Monteagle to Pelham. And he started the Monteagle and Pelham Turnpike Company. He used sections of the old Nickajack Trail and an old stagecoach road to build the new turnpike that would allow transportation to and from the hotel and the cave, and then later, eventually, cars. So what he didn't know at the time is that when he built this road, that it would actually become a part of what's known as the Dixie Highway. So in 1915, when plans to construct the Dixie Highway began, which is the United States Automobile Highway, it was planned to connect the U.S. Midwest with the southern United States. Grundy County was originally excluded from this highway. So Robert Payne actually offered to donate his toll road to become part of it if they would take the road through Grundy County. He knew that the new road would allow for thousands of travelers to pass right by Wonder Cave within a quarter of a mile. And today we now know that the Dixie Highway is 5,786 miles long. On this slide, you'll actually see in the middle of the screen there a token that was found a few years ago along what used to be that toll road. So people would use that little token to get up and down the mountain. And then here's a few more photos. On the left, you can actually see when it was a turnpike and it was just a dirt road. And then on the right, when it later became known as the Dixie Highway and was paved for cars. Here's an aerial view. You can see where in the red circle on the left slide, you can see where Wonder Cave is. And then you can see actually how close the Dixie Highway came to Wonder Cave. So it was a pretty smart business decision for him to do that. Also, in an effort to attract guests from the hotel to the cave and more people to the hotel, Robert Marion Payne placed a lot of religious statuary around the grounds at Wonder Cave. He also had water pumped from the cave up the mountain to the hotel, and he had ads boasting that fine spring water was for his affluent guests. And then later in 1920, the steam pump was actually disassembled and no longer used. And as you can see there in the photo on the left, it was actually quite unattractive. And today, if you stand in that same spot, you can actually look in the stream bed and see remnants from that steam pump. In 1909, they decided to install a acetylene gas system, which we know as carbide. They were previously using a gasoline lighting system. The acetylene was less expensive and more reliable than electricity was at that time. Another benefit to using the acetylene gas instead of electricity was they didn't get any of the growth or on the formations in the cave. So most commercial caves you go in, around the lighting, you see all of the green patches of moss and whatnot growing. That never happened in Wonder Cave because it was never lit by electricity, even to this day. After they stopped using the acetylene gas, they started using Coleman lanterns to give tours. And in this slide, you'll actually see the old acetylene gas system that they used. There's a close-up view on the picture on the left. And then if you look to the right, you'll see it dead center. But if you notice, just to the left of the gas system, it looks like rock, but that is actually a carbide dump. It's a very huge carbide dump that's in the cave there. So in 1909, Robert Marion Payne actually had one of the first laws ever passed in the state of Tennessee to make it illegal to break any formations inside of his cave. And then this is just a copy of that. In 1912, the State Geological Survey of Tennessee began to prepare reports on all the important caves of Tennessee. They wanted to show what deposits occurred in them, the life inside them, and if they had any value to the state. And in August of 1912, they published an article with a partial map of Wonder Cave. So they went in and they actually only mapped half of the cave, and this was the first map that was ever produced of the cave. A few years later, in 1914, they decided to blast open a new entrance into Wonder Cave where you could walk in, whereas people were previously taking boat tours. You can see in the middle photo there where the water is, that's where the boat tours used to start, and you see the new door, and then on the right photo, the passageway that they blasted into. They dedicated the entrance to Will M. Fitzgerald, who was one of the original discoverers, and they had a large community picnic that day and gave tours of the cave. In 1917, on June 28th, Robert Marion Payne died, and in his last will and testament, he appointed a board of trustees to run the business of Wonder Cave. So that's why after he passed away, his family sold the hotel because they could, but according to his will, they could not sell the cave, and that the trustees were to only sell it after 21 years, and then his family could take the proceeds from that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they never actually did sell the cave. It stayed in the family all the way up until 1980, which we'll get more into that. In November of 1919, Robert's wife, Emma Elizabeth Payne, died. So at that time, that left Charles Buford Payne and Katie Payne Sales, who were their children, to run the cave. But then in 1928, Charles Buford Payne committed suicide by swallowing a bottle of mercury. So now it was just Robert's son, Katie, and her husband, Jefferson Jones Ralston, who were running the cave. So in 1929, J.J. and Mary took over management of Wonder Cave. They also built a two-story log home next to Wonder Cave. Their house served as a home for them, also as a ticket office, and in later years it actually served as a bed and breakfast. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, like most families, the Ralstons did suffer economic hardships. J.J. had to take a job in South Pittsburgh, and he had one employee who ran the cave, Ed Parks, who only made $1 a day. Ed, who was born in 1890, actually grew up near the cave, and he was one of the first tour guides there. Now, here are some photos of what the entrance originally looked like on the left when Robert, Mary, and Payne commercialized it. And then later, when J.J. and Katie, they built their house, they built this new building to go with it on the right, and they deconstructed the wall, and they had a new entrance into the cave. Here's a closer up view in the top right. You can actually see the roof of their cabin over there and the stairs that go up and down to it. We're going to take a few minutes here to go through some slides of some old postcards from the cave up into the era that we've been discussing from the early 1900s to the 1930s. You'll see in this photo there's one of the old boats where they used to give the boat tours. And you're going to start to get a feeling for the formation area in this cave and how big these formations actually are, and why so many people were attracted to it. When we were actually surveying the cave in this area, we did find a ton of old broken flash bulbs. All right, so now into the 40s. Dr. Henry T. Kirby Smith, who was a Sewanee physician and caver, he kept a very detailed journal of caves in this region. His family actually owned Wet Cave, and as a child, he regularly visited Wet Cave and others with his father. He moved away for a while, but then he did later return to Sewanee in 1940. Some of Dr. Kirby Smith's written observations are in many cases the first ever made for a number of Tennessee caves. In his journals, he actually had 3 entries for Wonder Cave, where he went in and explored the cave on those occasions. And he talks about how in some areas of the cave, he was the first person to ever visit that area. And on the right side, on that photo, that's actually at the very back of the cave, the very last formation in there. Also, in 1945, Mary Ralston and 3 of her sons. Now, Mary was the granddaughter of Robert, Mary, and Payne. And so her and 3 of her sons went on a trip in the cave on this particular day, and they wrote their signatures everywhere throughout the cave, more than a dozen times. And I actually find it pretty impressive that in 1945, Mary actually made it to some of the places she did in the cave. In the top left, you see her signature. It's almost like in a chalk, and it's at the very top of the pyramid room. And then her 3 sons, Frank, Hugh, and Marion, also wrote their names everywhere. When we were actually surveying If you see the photo in the top right, it says, look for the bottle. And we came across that and we're like, look for the bottle? What bottle? Well, we never found it, so who knows what was actually in it. Maybe it was a bottle of liquor, so they were celebrating they made it back that far, or maybe it was a stash of food. Who knows? So now into the 50s. So it was published in the March 1954 NSS News that a joint undertaking by the Tennessee Division of Geology and the Nashville Grotto would result in a relatively complete map of Wonder Cave. So on December 27, 1953, Tom Barr, along with Bill Cuddington, Roy Davis, Frank Ralston, and a few others, spent several hours in the passages beyond the Pyramid Room making additions to the 1912 map that was produced by the Tennessee Division of Geology. And then Barr actually published this in his 1961 Book of Caves along with a description of the cave. So everything that's circled in red there on the right of the map is the addition that they actually made to the map. And if you actually take that map that Tom Barr created and you position it as an overlay on a topo, you can see where they thought the cave was trending. Everybody thought for years that this cave headed east into the cove. And our survey actually found something a little shocking and different, which we'll get to towards the end. In 1960, Wonder Cave got a new ticket office. They actually purchased the building from a Sears and Roebuck catalog and then had it constructed on site. In 1963, J.J. and Mary's son, Frank Ralston, took over managing Wonder Cave. Records at that time showed annual visitation was to be around 40,000 visitors a year. Now, the next few years, the family had quite a few deaths. In 1965, Mary Orme Sells Ralston, which was J.J.'s wife and Frank's mother, passed away. In 1965, on November 24th, Mary's mother, Katie Payne Sells, passed away. So that was Robert's daughter and granddaughter. And then on April 19th, 1967, Jefferson Jones Ralston passed away. So after all of those family members passed away, that left the children of J.J. and Mary, Frank Ralston, Marion Greer Ralston, Elizabeth Orme Ralston, and Hugh Sells Ralston. Now, when we started the survey of Wonder Cave, the landowner told us, look for the grave on one of our first trips in there. And we were kind of unsure what exactly he was talking about, but he claimed that J.J. Jefferson Jones Ralston was buried in the cave. And, you know, landowners say strange things sometimes, so we didn't really know what to expect. And then on a survey trip, one of our surveyors said, hey, I found the grave. And so if you notice on the right, there's a photo. I think it's a hoax, but we never dug it up because it told good ghost stories while we were in the cave. But I also never could find his tombstone in the cemetery. So who knows if he's really there or not. Also, because of its size, the capacity in Wonder Cave was set at 2,100 as a fallout shelter. They stored food, water, and other survival supplies inside the cave, but they did later, thankfully, remove all of that stuff due to deterioration, and it's no longer in there. You'll also see on this slide some old publications, a newspaper clipping, and a pamphlet from the cave in the 60s. Here is another pamphlet that you would have seen from the cave around that time. And then here's a few more. You'll actually see on the far right where they're using the Coleman lanterns in the photo on that pamphlet. And then also, like any commercial cave, you could buy trinkets in the gift shop, matches, spoons, bells, glasses, postcards, etc. In the mid-1960s, Interstate 24 opened and bypasses the Dixie Highway. Wonder Cave lost 90% of its business. So instead of people driving along and being within a quarter mile of Wonder Cave, they were now about 7 miles off the interstate to get there. And at that time, people just didn't want to drive off. They were seeing advertisements for Ruby Falls and Raccoon Mountains, both in Chattanooga, were open by this time. And Ruby Falls had the big barn campaign I'm sure most of us know about, so everybody was just bypassing right by Wonder Cave. It was just completely and totally forgotten about. They did try to do a few barns themselves, you'll see in the photos here, but it wasn't successful. Frank also tried a few other things. He became a member and served as a regional vice president in the National Caves Association, which is a nonprofit trade association that was founded in 1965 by a small group of private show cave owners. They sought to bring together show cave owners and operators from across the United States to promote the show cave industry to the public, share information and ideas, and to lobby for legislation favorable to the show cave industry. But unfortunately, due to all of Frank's efforts, Wonder Cave never really recovered from the interstate opening. He did continue to manage the cave until his death in 1980. The cave did remain open for a few years before it closed again. And then in 1983, it was sold to Bill Hudlow Sr. He immediately reopened it for visitation. He had really huge plans to add a campground, a runway for airplanes, a shop offering local handmade goods. He also planned to open up a lodge. His thought was that if he could get people there to stay for a week, that would be great. He could offer them all these different things to do while they were there in addition to visiting the cave. Not sure exactly what happened to his plans, but they did not go through. And in 1987, he did sell the cave to Chattanooga businessman Bruce Bourne. Bruce's sister Julia continued to operate the commercial cave until she got married in the year 2000, when the cave actually closed indefinitely. In 1987, Wonder Cave, along with 16 acres around the cave, the J.J. Ralston House, the Wonder Cave entrance building, and the first mile of cave was added to the National Register of Historic Places for its significance in architecture and tourism in Grundy County, Tennessee. Now, one of the things Jason and I noticed when we were surveying the cave is that we never saw a plaque on the property that stated that it was on the National Register of Historic Places. So we actually were able to raise money to have a plaque purchased for the Bourne family to put on display at Wonder Cave. So we had a big party there that day and presented them with this plaque. It was a really special event. Then in December of 2014, 5 years after trying to gain access, Jason Hardy and myself began the survey of Wonder Cave with Jason as the lead cartographer. We actually tried to get married at Wonder Cave. We had reached out to the owners on numerous occasions to try to gain access, to visit, to survey, like I said, to try to get married on the property, and never had any success until one day some of our friends actually kind of crashed a private party that was at Wonder Cave. They didn't realize they were crashing a private party, but they met one of the sons of the owner, and they started talking to him about surveying and all of that. And so they put us in touch with him. Jason went into his office in Chattanooga, showed him some other maps that he had drafted, and they gave us permission to start surveying the cave. So our first day was December 13th, 2014. We worked our way through what was known as the Great White Way, and it was called that because when it was lit by carbide, the passage appeared to be a bright white. Here are some more photos from that passage. Now you'll notice in these photos there's a metal walkway in the cave now. The Bourne family, from my understanding, placed that in the cave in the 80s just to try to help with the mud situation, because when the cave gets a lot of water, this whole area can flood. So we went back the next month on January 3rd, 2015, picked up our survey where we left off and surveyed an area known as the Devil's Playground. A lot of these names came from old postcards from around the turn of the century. And then we surveyed up to what is known as the Giant Stairway. If you look at the photo on the left, in the right side of the photo, you see that there's actually a Kesson tape pulled all the way up there to that little light in the distance. That is actually a 100-foot survey shot. And on the right side, that is what is actually at the top of the Giant Stairway. So it's pretty easy survey through here because the passage is pretty big and we were actually getting quite a few 100-foot shots. We decided to go back the next day. However, overnight we had about 2 inches of rain. We were not exactly sure how it was going to affect the cave. We had some other people come in with us to survey, and we kept telling them, oh, it's going to be a dry cave, it's going to be no problem, easy day of surveying. Well, after that rain, we got there. This is what we were faced with. This is about waist-deep water on me. But we did wade through it and make our way up to the formation area, where we were able to stay dry the rest of the day and start our survey in the formation area of the cave. There is one little side passage that has these really nice pearls that you'll see the photo of up in the top right. The cave actually seems to be healing itself from all the visitors that it had when it was open as a commercial cave. Over 2 million people actually went through Wonder Cave while it was open commercially. So personally, I don't feel that it's necessarily a bad thing that it's closed now, because the cave's getting the rest that it deserves, and it's regrowing some formations. So we made 2 more trips in January to finish up the formation area before moving past the tourist area of the cave. I don't know exactly how many loops we had in that area, but it was a crazy number, like more than 30. The formation area is just so big, and just surveying it, there weren't really walls. There's just like walls of formations. We also came across some old signatures in there from around the turn of the century. There's some old wooden bridges across some areas to get to other parts of formation areas. Up in the top right, you see all the broken flash bulbs that I mentioned earlier. And we actually even found parts of an old explosives box when they were making the trails in there, and they were doing some blasting to move some formations out of the way. In the far right photo, you actually can see a crack down the middle of that formation. I believe that is from when they were doing explosives, because there's a big splatter type area behind it where it looks like a charge had went off. And in the middle there, you can actually see that crack on the left side of the photo going down. Now here is the sketch. The formation area was drawn at 20 feet to the inch. This is the planned view of the formation area. After we did the formation area, Jason actually changed his scale to 40 feet to the inch, because the cave was just too massive to continue at 20 feet to the inch. Here is the running profile of the formation area. And then here is the passage that I was showing earlier, the giant stairway that goes off next to the formation area, and then the main passage continues to the right. Here are some photos by Nathan Williams. He went into the cave several times to do some photos for us and the landowner. I'd showed him a whole bunch of my postcards before we went in the cave, but I didn't want to recreate any of them. But we did, not on purpose. But that's me in the photo on the left, and then that's an old postcard on the right there. Here are some more of Nathan's photos from the formation area. And again, on the right side of this slide, you see that big formation, you see that crack in it. And then here is a really nice photos of those pearls that I mentioned earlier, that are just right there, almost in the middle of the passage. And then a few more photos by Frank Vogel of the formation area. There's a really nice one by Nathan. And then that's the giant stairway again there. They've got the whiskey barrel sitting there where the formation drips into it. So you really get a good idea of the size of this formation area. It's quite huge. So in February of 2015, we picked up our survey beyond the tourist area of the cave. When we survey a cave, We like to survey it as we go, even if it's not a virgin cave, because it still brings some excitement to us to never know what's around the corner. We had heard that there was a swim just beyond the tourist area of the cave. We weren't exactly sure what to expect, so we went into the cave with some little cheap Walmart blow-up boats, and we named them the Cave Paddler, the SS Hardwood, and some other names. And we're just going to have some fun with it and just go see what we could do. So we started surveying down the passage, and it's actually quite big. And then we came to the swim. So we learned that while using blow-up boats seemed like a good idea, it was too hard to keep them steady enough to read the instruments. So we flailed around for a bit before we finally gave up and decided that we would have to reformulate our plan and come back another day and pick up the survey through the swim. So we decided to use inner tubes and swim fins, which helped a lot more. One of us would sit in the inner tube and the other one would kind of try to hold them steady. It was still challenging, but we were able to do it. The swim is actually about 400 feet long and you're going upstream, so it was challenging, but we got through it. We surveyed all the way up to the base of the pyramid room that day. And now we surveyed into what we called Wonder Camp. Because of getting through the swim and just getting wet, and we really wanted to do some long trips in the cave, we decided to do some camp trips. So we set up what was called Wonder Camp, which is at the base of the pyramid room. And I like to jokingly say it's where men go to become boys. We actually had some really good times in the cave surveying during our camp trip. So the first one was May 23rd and 24th of 2015. We spent 30 hours inside the cave surveying the pyramid room. We had a lot of help from Ben Miller, his wife Katie, and Josh Brewer. In the middle there, you'll see some sketches from the pyramid room, and those sketches are 40 feet to the inch. So the room dimensions are approximately 450 feet wide, 350 feet long, and 130 feet tall. So it was actually at the top of that pyramid room where earlier I showed you Mary's signature that was at the top of that pyramid room. So to me, again, it was quite impressive that she made it all the way up there in the 1940s, probably with just a lantern. Also helping us during the first camp trip was Team Allenbach, Brent, Nancy, and Scout. While they did not sleep in the cave with us that night, they did camp outside on the surface, and they returned in the next day to finish a loop that they began the day before. So while we camped in the cave, they swam in, swam out, and then the next day they swam in again to help us and then swim out again. After we finished that trip, we went up to the mountain and we went to a local restaurant, and as soon as we walked in, the guy behind the counter was like, "Do you want a free rib?" And we were just like animals, like, yes. Our next camp trip was in June. And again, we spent another 30 hours inside of the cave, finishing up the survey in the pyramid room and starting to pick up the passage beyond. And here are some of those sketches. Again, this is 40 feet to the inch. Again, 100-foot survey shots were common. Way back in the cave, we actually found some little bones and teeth, which I believe were rat teeth and most likely raccoon teeth. Not sure how they got all the way back there. Maybe there's some little tiny hole we never found or could fit through. Here's some images from that passageway beyond the pyramid room. It was actually quite large passage. The widest section we surveyed was 180 feet wide in one area. The ceiling stayed pretty consistent, about 20 feet or so high. Also, during our second camp trip, we celebrated a birthday. Haley Steinman, she had actually turned 22. So Jason decided he wanted to bring in a cake for her. So we brought it in a Pelican case, brought it in frozen. But for some reason, we only brought 11 candles. So we did light them twice and make her blow them out twice. We actually ate pretty good while we were in the cave when we camped in there. In August of 2015, we did a day trip with 2 teams. It was me and Jason and the Grindles, and then Team Allenbach came back to help us again. Scout was actually sick this day, as you can see in the middle photo there. She was not feeling too well. However, it did begin to rain while we were outside, and that was actually the first time while we were in the cave that we were able to notice that there was a heavy rain going outside, because we just saw the water started coming in everywhere. And again, here you can see that on the left side is in the back. There's like this huge, I guess, hole where the water drains, and you can see it's dry there on the left side. That was in August, and then on the right side, that's that same hole a few months later in November. This is also near the back of the cave. I thought it was a pretty cool little section. And then this beautiful formation is located at the very end of the cave. So once you go past the formation area and you go down the main passage towards the end of the cave, you don't see any other formations in the cave until you get to this one at the very back. And then here it is during a winter month. You can see where the water comes in there as a waterfall. So while we were actually surveying the cave, Charles Stephen from Auburn University had contacted me about doing a biological inventory of the cave next door, Crystal Cave, and I told him we were surveying Wonder Cave, so he might as well come do that one also. So he found lots of little creatures inside the caves, lots of spiders, crayfish, snails, salamanders, all of that good stuff. So when we finished our survey, we set right at about 400 stations. Our total survey length came to 14,678.3 feet. It was previously listed as only 7,000 feet long in the TCS, and it is the 58th longest cave in Tennessee, whereas it was 149 on the list. And most importantly, what you can actually see there in the center, kind of in a yellow color, you see the survey overlaid on the topo map, and you can actually see where when we hit the pyramid room, the cave turns north. So everybody thought for years that it headed east. Now we did get a little bit of survey headed east, but the majority of the cave actually, it almost does a U-turn and starts heading north. At the end of the cove is a waterfall called Deer Lick Falls. We do believe that a lot of the water that's coming through that waterfall does actually end up in Wonder Cave, and eventually we would like to do some dye tracing out there, because we do feel like that there is passage headed east. It just needs to be found. So as always, I like to give a big thanks, obviously, to the Bourne family for allowing us access to this wonderful cave, Ben Miller and Josh Brewer for their help sketching on the project, the Grundy County, Tennessee Historical Society, the South Pittsburgh, Tennessee Heritage Museum, and the National Speleological Society Library for documents and postcards, Jack Spees for his help on the Wonder Cave booklet, which he actually wrote before we did all of our survey, and then, of course, all of the surveyors who helped us on the survey of the cave. Obviously, my husband, Ben Miller, Josh, the Allenbachs, Clint Barber, Katie Ingram Miller, Marty Abercrombie, Travis Camp, Hannah Keith, Nancy Lilly, Tevis Couts, Donna Sealer, Stephen Collins, Ann Blaine Grindle, and Haley Steinman. Without them, it would have taken us a whole lot longer to survey Wonder Cave. We actually spent about a year surveying the cave. And then, of course, I couldn't resist this photo. There's a formation inside the cave called the Onyx Goat. So I got Marion in there on a trip, and I had to do a photo of the old goat with the onyx goat. So what's next? We actually had a bat biologist visit Wonder Cave because while we were in there, we found a room that had a large amount of bat guano, and they actually came in there and they were able to determine that the bat guano was probably over 100 years old. And so there's not really a large bat colony used in the cave at this time. We also want to survey Crystal Cave, which is one of the most biologically diverse caves in Tennessee. Crystal Cave is actually hydrologically connected to Wonder Cave. The water comes out of Wonder Cave, goes through a karst window, and then into what's known as Crystal Cave. We've started the survey there, but we have not finished it yet. And then, of course, we want to do the dye trace in Lane Cove to determine the water sources for the cave. And that is all I have.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you. Those are some amazing pictures you've got there. And I appreciate your coming back for doing this again. All right. Now, any questions people have on what Kelly's talking about and how the cave, evolved over the years? You did a really, really thorough job of everything.
Thank you.
I mean, very thorough. I think you answered probably every question anybody could have had. That's amazing. And all that time and effort you and your husband put into this is stunning. So,
Thank you.
hang on. Doggone it. You still have the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, if anybody has any questions, you can email Kelly, or you can go through the NSS and email us, and we can ship everything off to Kelly. But we want to thank you, Kelly, you and your husband too, for doing this webinar and for all the time that you guys spent on that. That was amazing. What you spent your time on, that just totally stuns me. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much for all of your attending, and we wish everybody safe caving, and we'll talk to you on the next webinar. Have a good night.